For 50 skills learned over the past 3 years, I have spent a lot of time practicing. Some of that practice was really good, fruitful practice, and some was a bit of a waste of time. We don't want to waste our time when we're practicing because learning new skills is difficult enough as it is. So I've compiled a list of smart practice techniques that I employ every day when I'm learning new things that help me along the way. One of the hardest things about practicing is actually practicing, getting down to it, spending an hour or so from a busy schedule dedicated to practice. I've found that one of the best ways to squeeze in practice around a busy schedule is to do just that, is to fit it around your day and modify your day very, very little so that it doesn't really feel like you're out of sorts. Like many people, I spend an enormous amount of time just sitting at my desk doing mundane stuff. And I found that when I was learning the Rubik's Cube, the easiest way for me to actually put in practice was to simply have a Rubik's Cube on my desk. Naturally, after 40 or 50 minutes of just looking at the screen, I take a break. I take a 5 or 10 minute break. If the Rubik's Cube was just sitting on my desk, I would find myself just putting in 10 or 15 minutes. This was a way of practicing without sacrificing my free time or giving up my lunch break and working on the Rubik's Cube. I could just squeeze in 15 minutes without really modifying my day at all. Simply by having it on my desk. It seems crazy, but that worked. Sometimes, however, it's just not that simple. Whatever you're learning, you might not be able to do it at your desk or squeeze it in between periods of work. You might need some dedicated time. And this was the case with muscle-ups. Muscle-ups are kind of like pull-ups, but they're an extended version. And I needed dedicated time at a gym practicing. I really struggled with this. When I came back from work, I was knackered, I was tired, I had no motivation to go out and train. So the only way that I found to get in regular quality practice was to squeeze it in on my way to work. I would ride to work about 7 AM each day on my bike, and I found that if I took a small detour, I could nip to this outdoor gym in London, and that way I could squeeze in 15 or 20 minutes of a really quick workout and then be on my way to work. It felt like I was really getting something for very little effort being put in. Don't get me wrong, waking up 20 minutes earlier and working out in the morning is not ideal, it's not the most pleasurable thing to do, but overall I felt that this was the best return on a small investment. The point I'm trying to make here is that I was able to reduce the barriers to practice effectively. If you can do this with your practice, reduce the barriers, the effort you need to actually begin practicing, you'll find yourself practicing a lot more. And these little chunks of practice time dotted around your schedule really do add up. Speaking of little chunks of practice time, this leads me on nicely to my second strategy, which is utilizing the Pomodoro technique. This technique seems almost obvious and super basic, but it's amazing how often I stray and forget about this technique, even though I know it's super effective. In essence, this technique is about engaging in deliberate practice for around 25 minutes at a time before taking a 3 to 5 minute break. Most people recommend that you do these Pomodoro cycles, that's 25 minutes and then a 5 minute break, around 4 times before you take a much longer break. It seems reasonable and obvious that you should take breaks, but it is common that people study far longer than is productive, and that is essentially just a waste of time. Our brains, just like muscles, get tired and don't perform as well. Most people recommend that you should do around 25 minutes, but I think it depends on what skill you're learning, whether it's physical or whether it's intense mental calculations. But the key here is to use a timer. Use some sort of alarm to tell you that the time that you allotted is now up and it is time to take a break. Adhering strictly to the timer that you set will help you avoid unproductive time, and that will really quicken up the speed at which you learn a particular skill. Moving on to tip number 3, let's talk about how we actually practice once we've decided that we're going to do it. My unusual career choice necessitates that I learn very quickly, so I've developed these techniques that I call smart practice. In the past, I considered any time spent doing the thing was considered good practice, but as I've kind of honed my technique over a number of different skills learned, I've realised that you can be much more systematic, much more deliberate with your practice and achieve better results faster. I've found that, broadly speaking, there are two types of practice: fun and deliberate. Guitar is a really good example for this. When I pick up the guitar, the first thing I want to do is play. So I'll pick up the guitar and instantly play AC/DC or Led Zeppelin, stuff that is easy, that I enjoy doing, and I could consider that practice. And I think this kind of practice is important, although it's not the most beneficial. It is important for your morale. However, I've found that practice and skill level can be accelerated hugely if you blend fun time practice with deliberate practice. And by deliberate practice, I mean just that. So time spent isolating areas that you're weak at, or working on one specific component of the skill, repetition, very, very deliberate practice. And this is the kind of practice that we know works, but isn't so enjoyable to do. It can be physically painful for something like the guitar, or it can be mundane, or it can be demoralising, and that's why we blend it with fun practice. The point I'm trying to make here is that by blending these two styles of practicing, you can really accelerate your progress whilst maintaining high levels of motivation. Tip number 4, self-diagnosis. It's 2019 and we can learn anything, particularly on this website Skillshare, without the help of a coach. There's lots of resources out there and more people are learning themselves. However, without a coach, it is sometimes difficult to pinpoint what the problem is that you have in your technique. And that's where this process of self-diagnosis really comes in. The technique in principle is really, really simple, but it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to actually perform, and it's most likely a discipline problem. It certainly is for me. So you have a problem with your technique and you want to solve it. You probably already have a good idea of the 3 or 4 things that might be causing this issue. And what I often find myself doing is trying to change all 3 or all 4 of those things at once. So the trick here is isolation. Change one thing in your technique at a time and monitor the results. And give it a good go as well. Don't just try something once, and if it doesn't work, move on. Change one thing, isolate it one at a time and see what the results are, and systematically go through the things that could be causing problems for you. This is exactly how a coach would tell you to work. They wouldn't say change this, change this, change this. You change one thing at a time because your brain's already overloaded trying to figure out this new skill. Changing 10 things at once is just going to make things worse. For example, muscle ups. I was really struggling with muscle ups. They just weren't happening for me. And what I realized was, by breaking the skill down, was that it wasn't actually my strength that was causing the problem, it was my technique. So what I did was I started practicing with the bands, and I would just do really easy workouts just focused on the technique of muscle ups. And this isolated the issue, that one very specific movement within the technique, the part where my forearms go over the bar, and I just practiced that one part, and then when I put it all together, I realized that that was the bottleneck. That's what allowed me to move forward. In this lesson, we covered practicing smart, practicing in the most efficient way. We talked about squeezing practice into your day without affecting your schedule too much, as well as the Pomodoro technique, blending fun and deliberate practice along with self-diagnosis. In the next lesson, we're going to look at frustration and pushing through the dip in the learning curve. I'll see you then.